Yeah.
Yes,
Everybody's
sir.
on. Everybody's on.
We just heard a version of Pretty Suzanne, and I'm thinking that may have been an early demo version. It was a bonus track when they re-released Black Monk Time, 20 years ago maybe, and it features the very fuzzed-out prominent bass line of a fellow who was playing with the Monks, a guy by the name of Eddie Shaw. Eddie, how are you, my friend?
Well, thank you. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. I shot you a message that for the last week or so, I've been immersed in Monk mania. I mean, I had been a fan for some years of just because of the sort of outlandish, for the time, especially songs like "I Hate You," "Shut Up," Monk Time. Yeah, they were love songs. They were kind of a different. They made you stop and think, though. You had to reconsider.
Haven't you ever been in love with someone and every once in a while think, God, I hate her, but I sure love her?
That was the vibe that you get from listening to the Monks, because the refrain is, "But call me," you know. We may need our time away, or we may just despise each other from time to time, but we'll talk later.
Okay.
What do you think about well, I mean, it's still going on. It's been over 20 years since the Monks were sort of rediscovered, especially here in the U.S., where the album had never been released in its day. I mean, even though there was a push to do so, it would have been nice had you been able to set up a U.S. tour in 66, 67. But it continues to grow. Does it amaze you to wake up in the morning and realize that people around the world are listening to the Monks?
Well, it was amazing. After I wrote the book and then it came out, these two guys showed up at my front door and asked if I was Eddie from the Monks, and I just about fell over. And they, well, from there we did a couple of reunion tours. We did play Vegas, and we did play New York. And Rick Rubin put the songs out on his label. That was, I don't know when that was. It could have been 2001 or 2002. I'm not sure. But, yeah, it was a total surprise and something that, well, you know, you don't want to think that you're a failure, because if you don't fail, you don't win. You know, you can't discover anything. So I think we've had all the experience of failure and success. And I should warn you, I lie 3 times a day, and it's early in the morning, and I haven't had a chance to lie yet.
So any 3 bits of information we get from you during this interview could be lies.
Well, I try to get them out of the way as early as possible in the morning so I don't have to lie for the rest of the day.
Would you say that 3 lies a day is just like your personal quota, or would you say that that's pretty general? Is that a general average for all people?
I think that's average.
Some more, some less.
Well, yeah, I never really thought about it that deep.
Eddie, I just finished reading your book, Black Monk Time. You finished that and got it published like 94 or so, right? It's been out for some time.
Yeah, I was studying writing after all those years being a monk, and my teacher, Gil Ralston, who did all of these Western TV shows and Bonanza and all those things. He was my teacher, and when he knew about my experience, he says, "You have to write about that one." So I did, and he was right. It worked pretty good for me.
Wonderful, and it's a book that's just full of anecdotes. Actually, it takes a while. It takes a couple chapters to get into the music end of it. I mean, because interwoven through the story is a romance, a love story. You were the first. Yeah. You were the first one of the monks to be married. As a matter of fact, you may have been married by the time you started calling yourselves the Monks. Is that right?
Yeah, but I was always on the road, and it was like, you're married, but you're never home.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty hard on the relationship, of course.
Your wife has a co-writing credit on the book. She helped out. Did she?
Well, we did that. We did that just because if anything happened to me, there would be no contention as to who it went to next.
Right. Well,
so that's the way it happened.
When you were working on the manuscript, was she on hand to jog memories and embellish some points for you?
Well, she might be there once in a while to tell me that I was lying.
I picked out 3, and there's so many, but I picked out 3 little points in the book that I think Riffin listeners here in the mountains and around the world on the internet would love to hear. And also I want to thank you for donating a couple signed copies of the book to the station to use for our spring fundraiser. One of those is available to listeners right now. If you want to call in and donate the $103 benefactor of Asheville FM, community radio, all nonprofit volunteer radio. Somebody listening out there could own an autographed copy of Black Monk Time by Eddie Shaw. And there are a few amazing points. When you were touring around Germany as the Monks, playing some clubs, occasionally playing auditoriums, there was an incident which may be one of the earliest examples of a musician crowd surfing. Do you know the one I'm getting at, Eddie?
Yeah, I saw him disappear over the edge of the stage. I was there.
Can you set that one up for us and tell us what went on that made Dave one of the early rock and roll crowd surfers?
Well, Dave was a fan of Elvis Presley, so he always thought that the most important thing to do was to make show. He'd say, make show, make show.
And he's playing the electric banjo, by the way.
Yeah, well, as it was that day, we weren't able to get a sound check because the band that was there getting the sound check before us used up all the time, so we couldn't get it. So when we went on stage, our sound was horrible. It was just nothing was coming out. So Dave started running back and forth across the stage. He said, just make show, because there were a couple of thousand people there. And he was running back and forth across the stage, and he got to one end of the stage and slipped and went right off the stage. And he disappeared, and everybody was just looking shocked. And I saw it I was standing on the other end of the stage as the bass player, and I saw hands lift this body back up and roll him on the stage, and he got up and started running again.
Oh. And, he wasn't even plugged in at that point. He was just making show.
He went across the stage, and the cable was bouncing behind him,
Oh, Dave, quite a character. When
we went backstage, when we were done, and the audience was just mainly in shock. It was just like people were everywhere you looked, all you saw was wide open eyes and open mouths, And we come running off the stage after it was over with and running down the hall to the dressing room saying, "What were you doing, Dave? What the hell happened to you?"
There were also people backstage at the time that when Casey Jones and the Governors got on stage and you guys backstage brooding kind of got to thinking they cheated us out of that sound check on purpose just to upstage us. There were people who were ready to kind of storm the stage and throw middle fingers and ruin things for Casey Jones and the Governors, but that didn't happen. Is that right?
Well, nothing happened bad. Actually, when I look back at it, it was it was funny, and if there was anybody that was entertained by it, I was.
Well, I have to say, today there are a heck of a lot more people listening to the Monks than listening to Casey Jones and the Governors, if that's any consolation.
Well, Peter, the drummer, and I, we used to run around. We were very good friends.
Uh-huh. And you mentioned there was an Irish bass player by the name of Whiskey. What group was that from?
Whiskey, that was, they were from the Netherlands.
Oh, okay.
And Whiskey was a German guy, and he called me Mr. Bassman, and everybody called him Whiskey, and we used to do a lot of partying together. And then, of course, there was Ian Wallace, who was with the King Crimson, and he and I used to hang out as well. And he ended up in Nashville as a studio musician. And I ended up doing a couple of albums in Nashville, too, with Bob Johnston. But that was years after the Monks.
Uh-huh.
Because I was a musician. My background was jazz, basically.
You were the sound of the future, though, Uberbeat.
Yeah, minimalism, and trying to just pack the message into as few words as possible.
And now the managers, the people who were helping you cultivate the Monk image, it sounds like they had you guys pretty well. I mean, they were pretty good pep talkers. They had you guys convinced for a while there that this Monk thing was going to happen in a big way.
Well, they were convinced, and as we did it, myself, having come from the background that I came from, it was one way for us all to find a way to work together without one person taking over the style of the group, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because one guy's a country western player, one guy's a jazz player, one guy's an Elvis Presley guy, and one guy learned how to play Green Onions on the organ in his living room, you know. and Roger, the drummer, was from Texas, a swing drummer. And so by breaking it down and getting rid of all the things from each other that someone else in the band didn't like, that's what we ended up with.
Oh my goodness, that's a pretty amazing formula, and it holds up today. The album Black Monk Time is timeless in a way. It holds up. It's just a really fun record. I don't care who you are. Black Monk Time is a fun record, and that's what in a sense, Eddie, the image that you guys were projecting was sort of ominous, and some of the sort of anti feelings, the attitude, what people consider proto-punk. You guys were early progenitors of the punk rock movement, that sort of attitude, and not being afraid to criticize the conventions. You guys were kind of cutting edge like that. But I think your wife, you mentioned in the book, she was kind of worried that you guys were projecting this sort of dark, angry energy, but when she saw you guys play up on stage, it became obvious that you were all just having fun. Well,
yeah, you experiment. For me, all of that is a kind of just looking for an answer to a question. You don't know what the question is, but we played, before we were the Monks, we played 6 hours a night, 7 nights a week. And on Sundays, we were on stage 8 hours because of the 2-hour matinee. And in that time, you start experimenting with the audience. And you see that if everybody's really enjoying you and liking you, and they're all talking to each other and having a good time, then you realize, wait a minute, we're not doing that good. And at the same time, you know, if they're all looking at you and not talking and they're leaving the room, they're also not doing that good. But when they're arguing among themselves and they're listening to you and watching, and they have these looks on their face, you know that you're creating a ripple of tension. And that tension is what makes things work.